Lord Matthias Ravencroft had not tasted human blood in 400 years. He had trained himself to survive on animal blood, on the thin sustenance of deer and wolves, and the occasional bear that wandered too close to his mountain fortress. The other vampire lords called it an affectation, a weakness disguised as principle. They whispered that Ravencroft had grown soft, that his power was fading, that he would eventually wither into one of those pathetic ancient vampires who could barely lift themselves from their coffins. Matthias let them whisper. He had his reasons that lived in nightmares he had never shared with anyone. But on the night, a pregnant human woman stumbled onto his territory burning with death fever. Those reasons collided with something stronger than principle. Something that would force him to break the only vow that had kept him sane for 4 centuries. The woman collapsed at the edge of his domain just past midnight, her body convulsing with the fever that had claimed 3 villages in the past month. Death fever showed no mercy. It burned through victims in days, leaving corpses that had to be burned to prevent spread. There was no cure. There was no treatment. There was only suffering and death, and the desperate prayers of those who watched their loved ones slip away. Matthias sensed her the moment she crossed his boundary wards, a flicker of mortal life where no mortal life should be. His shadow hound, Obsidian, raised his head from where he lay beside the fire, ears pricked toward the darkness beyond the fortress windows. "I know," Matthias said quietly. "I feel her too." He should have ignored it. Should have let nature take its course, let the fever claim another victim. Let the pregnancy end, as so many pregnancies ended when mothers fell ill. It was not his responsibility. It was not his concern. He had spent 400 years building walls between himself and humanity precisely to avoid moments like this. But something in the quality of her life force called to him. Something desperate and fierce, a will to survive that burned brighter than the fever consuming her body. She was fighting, this unknown woman, fighting for herself and for the child growing inside her, fighting alone in the darkness at the edge of a vampire's domain because she had nowhere else to go. Matthias pulled on his cloak and walked into the night. He found her curled at the base of an ancient oak, her body racked with shivers despite the sweat that soaked her tattered clothes. She was young, perhaps 20 summers, with dark hair matted to her face and eyes that flickered open when she sensed his approach. Those eyes held no fear. They were beyond fear, existing in that strange space where suffering becomes so absolute that nothing else can touch it. "Please," she whispered, her voice cracked and broken. "My baby. Save my baby. Not save me. Save my baby." Even dying, even burning with fever that would claim her within hours. Her first thought was for the child she carried. Matthias knelt beside her, pressing his pale hand to her forehead. The heat was staggering, far beyond what any mortal body should be able to generate. The fever had progressed to its final stages. She had hours at most, probably less. And when she died, the child would die with her. 2 lives extinguished because a plague had swept through lands that had no defense against it. "What is your name?" Matthias asked, not knowing why it mattered but needing to know anyway. "Alina," she managed. "Alina Vance. From Millbrook. Everyone there. Everyone is dead. I ran, I thought if I could get far enough, She broke off, coughing, and Matthias saw blood fleck her lips. The fever was destroying her from within, burning through organs and tissue with relentless efficiency. "You cannot outrun death fever," Matthias said gently. "No one can, I know." Her eyes found his, and despite the fever, despite the pain, they held clarity that startled him. "But I had to try. For her. I had to try. Her." The baby was a girl. Alina knew, somehow, the way mothers sometimes knew, and she had dragged herself across miles of hostile territory while her body consumed itself. All for a daughter she would never hold. Matthias should have walked away, should have returned to his fortress and let the fever complete its work. But he stayed, kneeling in the dirt beside a dying woman, feeling something crack open in his chest that he had kept sealed for 400 years. "There might be a way," he heard himself say. "But it would require something I have not done in centuries. Something I swore I would never do again." Elena's hand found his wrist, her grip surprisingly strong. "Anything. I will give anything. You do not understand what you are offering. I understand that my daughter will die if you do nothing. I understand that I am already dead." Her eyes burned into his with an intensity that had nothing to do with fever. "Whatever you need to take it. Whatever price you demand, I will pay it. Just save her. Please, save my daughter." The psychic channels erupted the moment. Matthias lifted Elena's body and carried her toward his fortress. Lord Cale Shadowmere's contemptuous voice cut through the night like a blade of ice. Ravencroft is bringing a fever victim into his home. Has he finally lost what remains of his deteriorated mind? Lord Vorn Blackwell's response carried more curiosity than contempt. Death fever is not transmissible to vampires. Perhaps he intends to study it. Study it? Cale's mental laugh was harsh. Ravencroft barely has the power to light a candle. What could he possibly study? The man feeds on rabbits and calls himself a lord. Matthias closed the psychic channel, shutting out the mockery that had followed him for centuries. Let them laugh. Let them whisper about his weakness. They did not know what he knew. They had not seen what he had seen. They had not held a dying child in their arms and watched the light leave her eyes while her blood still burned on his lips. He carried Elena into his fortress, into chambers he had not opened in 400 years, and laid her on a bed that had once belonged to someone he could not bear to remember. The fever was accelerating. Matthias could see it in the way Elena's body trembled, in the way her breath came in shallow gasps that grew weaker with each passing minute. He had perhaps 2 hours before the final stage claimed her, before her organs failed completely and took her unborn daughter with them. He had learned about death fever centuries ago, during the first outbreak that had swept through the mortal kingdoms. Vampires could not contract it. That much was true. But what the other lords did not know, what Matthias had discovered through terrible accident and desperate experimentation, was that vampire blood could fight it. Not cure it, not exactly, but slow it enough for the body to mount its own defense. The fever was essentially a war between the disease and the victim's life force. Vampire blood, with its ancient power and regenerative properties, could tip the balance. But there was a cost. There was always a cost. The blood had to be fresh, had to be potent, had to carry the full strength of a vampire who had fed recently on human blood, whose power was at its peak rather than diminished by centuries of abstinence. Matthias's blood, thinned by 400 years of animal feeding, would be useless. Worse than useless. It might accelerate the fever rather than slow it, might kill Elena faster than the disease would have. To save her, he would have to feed. To feed, he would have to break the vow he had made over the body of a child he had accidentally killed. A child whose face still haunted his dreams, whose screams still echoed in the hollow spaces of his memory. "You are hesitating," Elena whispered, her fever-bright eyes watching him from the bed. "Why?" Matthias turned away, unable to meet her gaze. "The treatment I mentioned, it requires something I cannot easily provide." Cannot or will not? The question cut through his evasions like a blade through silk. This dying woman, this mortal whose hours were numbered in single digits, had somehow found the strength to challenge him. "Both," Matthias admitted. "What I need, what you need, I swore I would never take again. The last time I did, someone died. Someone innocent. Someone who trusted me." Elena was silent for a moment, and Matthias could hear her labored breathing. Could hear the fever crackling through her body like fire through dry wood. "How long ago?" she finally asked. 400 years. "And in 400 years, have you hurt anyone else?" "No." "Have you wanted to?" Matthias closed his eyes, remembering the hunger that never fully faded, the craving that lurked beneath every moment of every night, every day, every hour. The wanting never stops. "I simply learned to refuse it." Elena's hand moved to her swollen belly, cradling the life that grew there. "I have wanted things too, wanted to give up, wanted to lie down and let the fever take me. The wanting was so strong sometimes that I could barely breathe through it." Her voice strengthened despite her weakness, but I refused, because something mattered more than what I wanted. Someone mattered more. She looked at him then, and her eyes held no judgment, no fear, only a desperate hope that burned brighter than the fever consuming her. "Whatever you did 400 years ago, whatever mistake you made, it does not have to define every choice you make forever. You can be different now. You can choose differently." Her hand reached toward him, trembling with effort. "Please, choose my daughter. Choose to save her, even if it means breaking your vow. I am begging you." The psychic channels crackled with fresh mockery. Lord Cale's voice slithered through the connection, amused and contemptuous. "I hear Ravencroft is nursing a fever victim. How touching. The great lord reduced to playing nursemaid to dying mortals. Perhaps next he will adopt stray cats and knit blankets for orphans." Matthias ignored him, but Lord Vorn responded with unusual thoughtfulness. Leave him alone, Kale. Whatever Ravencroft does in his own domain is his concern. His concern becomes our concern when it makes all vampire lords look weak. We are predators, Vorn. We do not coddle prey. We do not tend to the sick and dying. We are above such sentimentality, are we? Lord Soren Duskfall's ancient voice entered the conversation, carrying weight that silenced even Kale. I seem to remember a time when vampires were more than just predators, when we saw ourselves as guardians of the night rather than monsters in it. Perhaps Ravencroft remembers what the rest of us had forgotten. The channel fell silent. The other lords uncertain how to respond to Saren's observation. Matthias felt a flicker of gratitude toward the ancient lord, but pushed it aside. Gratitude would not save Elena. Gratitude would not give her daughter a chance at life. Only blood would do that. Only the blood he had sworn never to take again. He turned back to Elena, studying her face, seeing the determination that somehow survived despite the fever that was killing her. She reminded him of someone, of the child he had killed 4 centuries ago, not in appearance, but in spirit, in the fierce will to live that burned in her eyes. That child had trusted him too, had looked at him with eyes full of hope, believing he could save her from the illness that was claiming her young life. And he had tried, had fed on her father to strengthen his blood, had given her what he thought would be medicine. But he had taken too much, had let the hunger overwhelm his judgment. The father had died, and without the transfusion Matthias had promised, the child had followed hours later. 2 deaths because he could not control himself. 2 lives ended because he had believed he could walk the line between predator and savior. I killed them both, Matthias said quietly, the words escaping before he could stop them. The person I fed on, and the person I was trying to save. My hunger destroyed everything I was trying to protect. Elena's eyes held his, unflinching despite the confession. Then do not let your hunger control you this time. Be stronger than you were. Be better. What if I cannot? Then my daughter dies anyway, and nothing changes. Her voice cracked but did not break. At least give us a chance. At least try. Matthias stood at the window of his fortress, staring out into the darkness, while Elena's labored breathing filled the chamber behind him. The decision pressed against him like a physical weight, crushing and inescapable. He could feel her life force flickering, could sense the fever consuming what remained of her strength. An hour, perhaps less. That was all the time he had to make a choice that would either save 2 lives or add 2 more ghosts to the collection that already haunted him. Obsidian pressed against his leg, the shadowhound sensing his master's turmoil. The creature whined softly, a sound of concern that Matthias found oddly comforting. I know, he murmured, his hand finding the hound's dark fur. I know what I must do. I simply cannot find the courage to do it. The irony was not lost on him. 400 years of refusing human blood. 400 years of enduring the mockery of other lords. 400 years of slowly weakening while his principles remained strong. And now those principles stood between him and the only action that could save an innocent child. He thought about the village Elena had mentioned, Millbrook. Everyone dead, she had said. An entire community wiped out by a fever that medicine could not fight and prayer could not stop. How many children had died there? How many pregnant women had perished with their unborn babies still growing inside them? How many families had been erased from existence while vampires like Kale Shadowmere laughed about mortal weakness? And what had Matthias done during all of this? He had hidden in his fortress, feeding on deer and wolves, maintaining his precious principles while the world burned around him. His vow had kept his conscience clean, but it had not saved a single life. It had not prevented a single death. It had simply allowed him to pretend that the suffering of mortals was not his responsibility. I have been a coward, he said aloud, the words bitter on his tongue. I called it principle, but it was cowardice. I was afraid of what I might become if I tasted human blood again, afraid of losing control, afraid of proving that I am exactly the monster the stories say I am. Elena stirred on the bed, her fever-glazed eyes finding him across the room. You are not a monster. Monsters do not agonize over whether to help. Monsters do not carry guilt for 400 years. Monsters do not kneel beside dying women and offer them hope. You do not know what I am capable of. I know what you're doing right now. You are standing there, tearing yourself apart, trying to find a way to save my daughter without breaking whatever promise you made to yourself. Her voice was weaker now, each word costing her precious energy. That is not what monsters do. That is what good people do when they face impossible choices. Matthias crossed the room and knelt beside her bed, taking her burning hand in his cool grasp. If I do this, if I feed on human blood to strengthen myself, I may not be able to stop. The hunger I have suppressed for 4 centuries will awaken. I do not know if I can control it. Then find someone willing, someone who offers their blood freely, someone who can stop you if you go too far. Elena's grip tightened on his hand. There must be someone in the villages nearby, someone who would trade blood for coin or protection. You do not have to take it by force. The simplicity of her suggestion struck Matthias like a blow. In 400 years of abstinence, in all his agonizing over the dangers of human blood, he had never considered that path. He had assumed that feeding meant hunting, that taking blood meant taking life. But Alina was right. There were always mortals willing to trade what they had for what they needed. Blood was a currency like any other. The nearest village is 2 hours away, Matthias said slowly, his mind racing through possibilities. Even at my fastest, I could not make the journey and return before ... Bell quotes. He could not finish the sentence, then find another way. Elena's eyes were closing, her strength finally failing. You are ancient. You are powerful, even weakened. There must be something you can do. Some resource you have not considered. Matthias thought about his fortress, about the stores he had accumulated over centuries of cautious existence. Blood could be preserved, he knew. Some vampires kept supplies for emergencies, sealed in enchanted containers that maintained potency for weeks or months. He had never done so himself, had never seen the need when animal blood was readily available. But there was someone who might have what he needed. Someone who owed him a debt from decades ago, a debt never collected, a favor never claimed. Lord Sorin Duskfall, the ancient vampire, had spoken in Matthias's defense on the psychic channels, had suggested that vampires could be more than predators, had remembered a time when their kind served as guardians rather than monsters. If anyone among the vampire lords would help, it would be Sorin. Matthias opened a private psychic channel, reaching across the miles to the ancient lord's distant domain. Lord Sorin, I require your assistance, urgently. The response came immediately, Sorin's mental voice carrying curiosity rather than irritation. Ravencroft, I wondered if you would reach out. What do you need? Preserved human blood. As much as you can spare, as quickly as you can send it. There was a pause, and Matthias could sense Sorin processing the request, understanding its implications. You are going to try to save her, the fever victim, her unborn daughter. The woman is beyond saving. But the child might survive if I can strengthen my blood enough to fight the fever. Another pause, longer this time. You know what this will cost you. 400 years of abstinence, broken in a single night. The hunger will return. The cravings will intensify. You may never regain what you're about to lose. I know. And you are willing to pay that price? For a mortal child you have never met? Matthias looked at Alina, at the hand that still clutched his, despite her unconscious state, at the swollen belly that held a life desperate to begin. Yes, he said. I am willing. Sorin's response carried something Matthias had not expected. Warmth, approval, perhaps even respect. I will send what I have. My fastest courier can reach you within the hour. But Ravencroft, understand this. What you are attempting has never been done successfully. Vampire blood can slow death fever, yes, but it cannot guarantee survival. The child may die regardless of your sacrifice. The mother almost certainly will, I understand, do you? Because once you break your vow, there is no returning to what you were. You will carry this choice forever, whether it succeeds or fails. The hunger will remember the taste of human blood. It will demand more, and you will have to fight it every night for the rest of your existence. Matthias looked at Elena's still form, at the shallow rise and fall of her chest, at the life that clung to existence despite everything working to extinguish it. Some fights are worth having, he said quietly. Some prices are worth paying. I spent 400 years avoiding this moment, and what did my avoidance accomplish? Nothing. No one was saved by my abstinence. No lives were improved by my principles. I simply existed, alone and weakening, while the world suffered around me. Sorin was silent for a long moment. When he spoke again, his mental voice carried the weight of millennia. I have lived longer than you can imagine, Ravencroft. I've watched countless vampires make choices that define them, for better or worse. Most choose selfishness. Most choose survival at any cost. What you are choosing tonight is rare. Perhaps unique. I am choosing what I should have chosen centuries ago. Perhaps. Or perhaps 400 years of preparation were necessary for you to be ready for this moment. Perhaps everything you endured, every night of hunger and mockery and self-denial, was building toward this single choice. Soren paused. The blood is on its way. Use it well. The channel closed, and Matthias was left alone with the silence of his fortress and the fading heartbeat of the woman who had somehow cracked open the walls he had built around himself. The courier arrived in 40 minutes, a young vampire moving with speed that spoke of Soren's urgency. He carried a case containing 6 vials of preserved human blood, each one sealed with enchantments that maintained potency far beyond natural limits. He handed the case to Matthias without comment, his eyes carefully avoiding the fever victim visible through the open chamber door. "Lord Soren sends his regards," the courier said formally. "And a message. He says, the past does not have to be a prison. Sometimes it is simply a lesson we needed to learn before we were ready for the test." Matthias nodded, accepting both the blood and the wisdom. "Tell Lord Soren I am grateful. More grateful than I can express." The courier departed, and Matthias carried the case into the chamber where Alina lay. Her condition had deteriorated further in the time he had been waiting. Her breathing was barely perceptible now, her skin so hot that it seemed to shimmer in the candlelight. The fever had reached its final phase. Minutes remained, not hours. He opened the first vial, the scent of human blood hitting him like a physical blow. 400 years of denial collapsed in an instant, the hunger he had suppressed for so long roaring back to life with devastating force. His fangs extended involuntarily, his vision sharpening, his entire body trembling with need that went beyond desire into something primal and overwhelming. This was what he had feared. This was why he had sworn never to taste human blood again. The hunger was not something that could be reasoned with or controlled through willpower alone. It was a force of nature, as inevitable as gravity, as unstoppable as the tide. But Elena's words echoed in his mind. "Be stronger than you were. Be better." Matthias raised the vial to his lips and drank. The blood flooded his system like liquid fire, power surging through veins that had been starved for centuries. He gasped at the intensity of it, at the way his body responded to sustenance it had been denied for so long. Every sense heightened, every muscle strengthened. Every fragment of power he had lost over 400 years came rushing back in a single overwhelming wave. And with the power came the hunger, demanding more, screaming for more, telling him that one vial was not enough, could never be enough, that he needed to drink and drink until nothing remained. Matthias set down the empty vial with hands that shook violently. He forced himself to breathe, to focus, to remember why he was doing this. Not for himself, not to satisfy the hunger that clawed at his control. For Alina, for her daughter, for the chance to prove that he could be something other than what the hunger wanted him to be. He opened the second vial and drank it more slowly, forcing himself to savor rather than gulp, to maintain some semblance of control over the process. The power continued to build, his blood growing stronger with each passing moment. He could feel it now, the potency that had been absent for so long, the strength that would allow him to fight the fever-consuming Elena's body. By the third vial, his control was fragmenting. The hunger had become a living thing inside him, a beast that demanded release, that howled for the fresh blood it could sense in the dying woman beside him. She was right there, so close, so warm despite the fever. Her blood would taste so much better than preserved samples, would satisfy the craving in ways that nothing else could. Matthias gripped the edge of the bed, his knuckles white, his entire body rigid with the effort of restraint. He thought about the child he had killed 400 years ago, thought about her face, her trust, the light fading from her eyes. He would not let that happen again. He would not let the hunger win. "Alina," he said, his voice rough with strain, "I need you to wake up. I need you to help me stay in control." Her eyes fluttered open, fever-bright and barely conscious. But she saw him, saw the struggle written across his features. And somehow, impossibly, she smiled. "You are doing it," she whispered. "You are fighting. I am trying. Then keep trying." Keep trying. Matthias drank the fourth vial with Elena's eyes on him, her gaze anchoring him to purpose when the hunger threatened to sweep everything else away. The power was immense now, coursing through him with intensity he had not felt in centuries. His blood sang with strength that made the preserved samples seem like pale shadows of what true feeding could provide. But it was enough. It had to be enough. He set aside the remaining 2 vials, saving them for what might come after, and turned his full attention to Elena. The process he was about to attempt was dangerous and uncertain. He had done it only once before, 400 years ago, and that attempt had ended in tragedy. But the circumstances were different now. He was different. He had to believe that. "I am going to give you my blood," Matthias explained, his voice steadier than he felt. "It will fight the fever from within, strengthen your body's defenses. But for it to work, you must survive long enough for the treatment to take effect. The next hour will be critical." Elena nodded weakly, her hand moving to her belly in that protective gesture that had become instinctive. "And the baby? The blood will reach her through you. If it works, if your body can hold on long enough, it will protect you both." Matthias paused, forcing himself to speak the truth she deserved. "But I cannot guarantee success. The fever is far advanced. Your organs are failing. Even with my blood, there is a chance that neither of you will survive. But there is a chance. Yes. A small one." Elena closed her eyes for a moment, and Matthias could see her lips moving in what might have been prayer. When she opened them again, her resolve had hardened into something unbreakable. "Then give me your blood. Give my daughter her chance." Matthias bit into his wrist, feeling his fangs pierce flesh that healed almost instantly at his current level of power. He had to maintain the wound, had to focus on keeping it open while his blood flowed into the cup he held beneath it. The crimson liquid was darker than human blood, thicker, carrying within it the essence of centuries of existence and the fresh power of human sustenance. He lifted Elena's head gently, bringing the cup to her lips. "Drink slowly. As much as you can." She drank. The effect was almost immediate. Matthias watched as color flooded back into her pale cheeks, as her breathing deepened and steadied, as the terrible heat of her skin began to moderate into something closer to normal. The fever was not gone. He could still sense it fighting within her, but his blood was fighting back. A war was being waged inside Elena's body, ancient vampire power against a disease that had claimed thousands of mortal lives. "I can feel it," Elena whispered, wonder bleeding through the weakness in her voice. "It is like fire fighting fire. Something inside me is pushing back. That is my blood. It will continue fighting as long as you can hold on." Matthias refilled the cup, giving her more, watching the battle play out across her features. She grimaced as the blood worked its way through her system, as it encountered the fever and clashed with it in ways that caused her visible pain. But she did not cry out, did not beg him to stop. She simply endured, her hand never leaving her belly, her determination never wavering. The psychic channels erupted with fresh commentary as word spread of what Matthias was attempting. He had not bothered to shield his actions, had not tried to hide what he was doing. Let them watch, let them judge. Their opinions mattered nothing compared to the life he was fighting to save. Lord Cal's voice was predictably contemptuous. "Ravencroft is giving his blood to a fever victim. He has completely lost his mind. Vampire blood cannot cure death fever. Everyone knows this. Everyone knows it has never been tried properly," Lord Soren responded calmly. "There's a difference between impossible and unprecedented. The difference is semantic. He is wasting precious blood on a mortal who will die regardless. And for what? To prove some point about vampire compassion." Kael's mental laugh was harsh. "There is no such thing. We are predators. We take. We do not give. Perhaps that is why we are dying out." The new voice belonged to Lady Vera Moonwhisper, ancient and rarely heard on public channels. "Perhaps that is why fewer vampires are turned each century, why our territories shrink while human cities grow. We have forgotten how to be anything other than monsters. Ravencroft is remembering." The channel fell into shocked silence. Lady Vera had not spoken publicly in decades, had withdrawn from vampire politics entirely after some tragedy that predated even Saren's memory. Her words carried weight that transcended mere opinion. Matthias felt a flicker of gratitude but pushed it aside. The battle inside Elena was reaching a critical point. He could sense it, could feel the fever marshaling its final assault against the vampire blood fighting to contain it. "The next few minutes would determine everything. Elena," he said urgently, "stay with me. Do not let go." Her eyes found his, fever bright but aware. "I am here. I am fighting. Good. Keep fighting. Your daughter needs you to keep fighting." The fever surged and Elena convulsed, her body arching off the bed as the disease made its final desperate attempt to claim her. Matthias held her down, pouring more of his blood into her mouth, forcing strength into her system even as the fever tried to burn it away. Minutes passed like hours. Lena's convulsions gradually subsided, her breathing slowly stabilizing. The terrible heat of her skin finally beginning to cool. The fever was retreating, pushed back by vampire blood that refused to surrender, weakened by a treatment that everyone had said was impossible. And through it all, Matthias felt the baby's heartbeat, faint but steady, growing stronger as Elena's body stabilized. A new life clinging to existence with the same fierce determination her mother had shown. "You did it," Elena whispered, tears streaming down her face. "I can feel her. She is still alive. She is still fighting." Matthias sat back, exhaustion washing over him in waves. The hunger still clawed at his control, still demanded more than preserved blood could satisfy. But he had done it. He had faced the beast inside him and had not let it win. "We did it," he corrected quietly, "together." The hours that followed were a careful vigil. Matthias remained at Elena's side, monitoring her condition, ready to give more blood if the fever attempted to resurge. But the crisis had passed. Her body, strengthened by vampire blood, was winning the war that no mortal had ever won before. The death fever that had claimed entire villages was retreating before a treatment that every vampire lord had dismissed as impossible. Elena slept deeply, her body focused entirely on healing, on nurturing the life that grew within her. Matthias watched her breathe, counting each rise and fall of her chest like a miser counting coins. Each breath a small victory against the death that had seemed so certain just hours ago. Obsidian lay at the foot of the bed, the shadow hound's dark eyes never leaving Elena's sleeping form. The creature had accepted her somehow, had decided that this mortal belonged in their fortress, deserved his protection as much as his master did. "You always were a better judge of character than I," Matthias murmured, reaching down to stroke the hound's dark fur. "You knew she was worth saving before I did." The psychic channels had quieted, most of the lords retreating to their own affairs now that the immediate drama had passed. But Matthias could sense them watching, waiting to see if his unprecedented treatment would hold, or if Elena would relapse and prove Kale's contempt justified. Lord Saren reached out through a private channel as dawn approached. "How is she?" "Stable. The fever is broken. Her body is healing. And the child?" Matthias closed his eyes, extending his senses to the life that pulsed within Elena's womb. The heartbeat was stronger now, more defined. The vampire blood had not just saved the mother, but had strengthened the daughter as well. She lives. She thrives. Saren's mental presence carried something that felt like wonder. "You have done something remarkable, Ravencroft. Something that will change how vampires think about our relationship with mortals. I simply did what needed to be done." That is precisely what makes it remarkable. Most vampires do not see mortal needs as things that require our response. We view humans as prey at worst, background scenery at best. You saw a dying woman and chose to save her. That choice matters, regardless of outcome. Matthias considered the ancient lord's words, feeling their truth settle into his bones. "Why did you help me? You sent the blood without hesitation, without demanding anything in return. Why?" Soren was quiet for a moment. When he responded, his mental voice carried the weight of memory stretching back millennia. "Because I was you once. Long ago, so long that I barely remember it, I faced a similar choice. A mortal life that I could save if I was willing to sacrifice something precious. I chose to let them die. I chose my principles over their survival." The confession hung in the psychic space between them, raw and painful. "I have regretted that choice every night since," Soren continued. "Every time I close my eyes, I see their face. Every time I try to justify my decision, the excuses sound hollow and selfish. I told myself I was protecting something important, but what I was really protecting was my own comfort, my own certainty, my own unwillingness to change." "Why are you telling me this?" "Because you need to understand that what you did tonight was not just about saving Elena and her daughter. It was about proving that we can choose differently, that our nature does not have to be our destiny, that even monsters can become something better if they find the courage to try." Matthias absorbed this, feeling the weight of Saren's confession and the gift that it represented. The ancient lord had shared his deepest shame to help Matthias understand the magnitude of his own choice. "Thank you," Matthias said simply, "for the blood, for the truth, for believing I could do what needed to be done. Thank yourself, Ravencroft. You did the hardest part. You faced your fear and acted anyway." The channel closed, leaving Matthias alone with the sleeping woman and the shadow hound, and the growing light of dawn pressing against his fortress windows. He should rest. Should retreat to the darkness of his chambers and let the day pass in the death sleep that restored vampire strength. But he found himself reluctant to leave Elena's side, afraid that if he looked away even for a moment, the fever would return and claim what he had fought so hard to save. Elena stirred around midday, her eyes opening slowly, confusion giving way to recognition as she saw Matthias still sitting beside her bed. "You stayed," she whispered, her voice rough but stronger than it had been, "all night and into the day. You stayed. I could not leave until I knew you were truly recovering." Elena's hand moved to her belly, her expression shifting from confusion to wonder as she felt the movement within. "She is kicking. I can feel her kicking. That is a good sign. It means she is strong." Tears spilled down Elena's cheeks, but they were tears of joy rather than despair. "I thought I would never feel that again. I thought the fever would take everything before I could hold her, before I could see her face, before I could tell her how much I love her." She looked at Matthias then, really looked at him, and her expression held something that made his ancient heart ache. "You gave me that chance. You broke your vow, faced your fears, sacrificed something precious, all for a stranger you found dying at the edge of your domain." Her voice cracked with emotion. "How can I ever repay that? What could I possibly give that would equal what you gave me?" Matthias considered the question, remembering the hunger that still prowled at the edges of his control, the vow that lay shattered beyond repair, the centuries of careful abstinence that had ended in a single night of desperate choice. "Live," he said quietly. "That is all the payment I require. Live and raise your daughter and teach her that the world contains kindness in unexpected places. That is enough. That is more than enough." Elena's recovery progressed faster than Matthias had dared hope. Within 3 days, she was sitting up in bed, taking solid food, her body responding to the vampire blood with resilience that seemed almost miraculous. The fever had left scars. He could sense them in the way certain organs worked harder than they should. But she would live. She would carry her daughter to term. She would hold the child she had nearly died to protect. The baby, too, grew stronger with each passing day. Matthias could feel her life force expanding, could sense the vampire blood integrating into her developing system in ways he had not anticipated. She would be different, this child. Not vampire, not entirely human, but something new, something unprecedented. He did not mention this to Elena. There would be time for such conversations, later, when the joy of survival had settled into something more sustainable, when she was ready to hear that her daughter would carry a piece of immortality within her forever. Word of Matthias's success spread through the vampire territories with speed that surprised him. The psychic channels buzzed with discussion, debate, and something that sounded almost like hope. Lord Kale maintained his contemptuous stance, dismissing the treatment as a fluke, an aberration that could not be replicated. But other lords were asking questions, requesting details, wondering if perhaps the death fever that had plagued mortal lands for generations might finally have a counter. Lord Soren organized a private gathering of lords who wished to learn more, and Matthias found himself explaining the treatment to an audience of ancient vampires who listened with intensity he had never experienced. They took notes, asked probing questions, debated the implications among themselves, while Matthias stood before them like a scholar defending a thesis he had not known he was writing. "The key is potency," Matthias explained. "Vampire blood weakened by animal feeding cannot fight the fever effectively. The blood must be strengthened by human sustenance, preferably preserved to maintain potency without requiring active hunting." "You are asking us to feed on humans again," one lord observed, his tone more curious than accusatory. "Many of us have abstained for various reasons. I am asking you to consider that our abstinence may have been a form of selfishness. We refused human blood to protect our consciences, to avoid the hunger, to maintain control. But that refusal also prevented us from helping mortals when our help could save lives." The words felt dangerous as he spoke them, a challenge to centuries of vampire orthodoxy. But Matthias had spent 3 days watching Elena recover, watching her daughter grow stronger. And he could no longer pretend that his 400 years of principled abstinence had been anything other than elaborate cowardice. "The hunger is real," he continued. "The danger of losing control is real. I do not minimize these concerns, but we are ancient beings with centuries of experience and wisdom. If we cannot learn to manage our own appetites in service of something larger than ourselves, then perhaps we deserve the slow decline that Lord Vera mentioned." Lady Vera. Moonwhisper nodded from her seat at the back of the gathering, her silver eyes gleaming with approval. The young lord speaks truth. We have hidden behind our natures for too long, using the hunger as an excuse to take rather than give. Matthias has shown that another path exists. The question is whether we have the courage to walk it. The gathering continued for hours, discussion flowing into debate evolving into something that felt almost like consensus. Not every lord was convinced. Some, like Kale, remained committed to the old ways, to the belief that vampires existed to prey upon mortals rather than protect them. But enough were willing to consider alternatives that Matthias felt the first stirrings of genuine change. Elena joined him in his study 3 weeks after her recovery, her belly now visibly swollen with the life growing within. She moved carefully but confidently, her strength returned, her eyes clear of the fever that had nearly claimed her. "They are calling you the healer, Lord," she said, settling into a chair across from his desk. "The village network is full of stories about the vampire who cured death fever. Mortals are speaking your name with something other than fear for the first time in living memory." Matthias looked up from the notes he had been compiling, documentation of his treatment process for lords who wished to attempt it. "I did not cure anything. I simply gave you the strength to cure yourself. That distinction matters less than you think." Elena smiled, that warm expression that seemed to illuminate whatever space she occupied. "What matters is that people who had given up hope are finding it again. Mothers who thought they would lose their children are asking questions, seeking help, believing that survival might be possible. The treatment is not guaranteed. I explain that to the lords who are attempting to learn the process. Not every patient will respond as you did, but some will. Some who would have died will live. Some children who would have been orphaned will grow up with parents. Some families that would have been destroyed will remain whole." Elena leaned forward, her hands cradling her belly. "That matters, Matthias. That matters more than percentages and guarantees." She was right, and he knew it. The hunger still prowled at the edges of his awareness, still demanded satisfaction that preserved blood could not fully provide. He had not slept properly since breaking his vow, had not found peace in the death sleep that should have restored him completely. The cost of his choice was real and ongoing, but so was the life kicking inside Elena's womb. So were the messages arriving daily from lords who had successfully treated their own fever victims. So was the hope spreading through mortal villages like a different kind of contagion, one that healed rather than killed. "What will you do now?" Matthias asked. "When your daughter is born, when you're fully recovered? Will you return to the mortal lands?" Elena was quiet for a moment, her expression thoughtful. "I have been thinking about that. About where home is now, after everything that has happened." She looked at him with eyes that held depths he was only beginning to understand. "I think perhaps home is not a place. I think perhaps home is where someone cared enough to save you when saving was impossible." The birth came on a night when the moon hung full and silver in the cloudless sky, its light spilling through the fortress windows like liquid blessing. Elena had chosen to remain in Matthias's domain, had made a home in chambers that had stood empty for centuries, had become a presence that transformed the ancient fortress in ways he could not have predicted. Matthias paced outside the birthing chamber, more anxious than he had been during the worst of Elena's fever. A mortal midwife from the nearest village had been summoned weeks ago. A woman named Greta, who had initially been terrified to enter vampire territory, but whose fear had gradually transformed into something approaching professional curiosity. "You care for her," Greta had observed during one of her preparatory visits, watching Matthias hover near Elena with protective attention. "I have delivered hundreds of babies, my lord. I know what love looks like, even when it wears an unfamiliar face." Matthias had not corrected her assumption. He was not certain she was wrong. The screams from the birthing chamber were difficult to bear. Each cry of pain twisted something inside him, made the hunger surge with inappropriate intensity. He fought it down, focusing instead on the miracle that was unfolding, on the new life that was fighting its way into existence. Lord Siren's voice reached him through the private channel they had maintained since the night of Elena's treatment. "I sense your agitation from 3 territories away, Ravencroft. Is everything proceeding normally?" The midwife says yes. "But the sounds ... quotes. Matthias trailed off, unable to articulate the strange anguish of standing helpless while someone he cared for suffered. Birth is always violent. It is how life announces itself, through struggle and pain, and the fierce determination to exist. Saran's mental voice carried something that might have been amusement. You have faced ancient enemies and survived centuries of hunger. You will survive this as well. The cry that came from the birthing chamber was different from the others. Higher, thinner, carrying the unmistakable quality of new lungs drawing first breath. Matthias froze, every sense straining toward that sound, toward the life he had helped preserve now announcing its arrival in the world. The door opened, and Greta emerged with a bundle in her arms, her face exhausted but radiant. A healthy girl, my lord. Strong lungs, strong heartbeat, strong everything. Whatever you did to save her mother, it blessed this child as well. She placed the bundle in his arms before he could protest, and Matthias found himself holding the tiny creature he had fought so hard to save. She was impossibly small, her face red and wrinkled, her eyes squeezed shut against the brightness of the world she had entered. But there was something in her, something he could sense with his ancient perception, that was different from any mortal infant he had encountered. The vampire blood had not just saved her, it had changed her. She will need a name, Greta said, watching him with an expression that held no fear. Only the practical concern of a midwife completing her duties. Have you and her mother discussed what to call her? Matthias looked down at the child, at the future he had accidentally created in trying to save a life. Elena wished to name her Hope, after what we both believed was impossible. Hope. Greta nodded approvingly. A good name, a strong name. This child will need both. Elena was exhausted but alert when Matthias brought Hope to her, placing the baby in arms that had nearly failed to hold anything ever again. The tears that streamed down Elena's face were the purest expression of joy he had ever witnessed, the kind of happiness that transcended words or explanations. She is perfect, Elena whispered, tracing her daughter's tiny features with trembling fingers. She is absolutely perfect. She is changed, Matthias said gently, knowing he could not delay this conversation. The blood I gave you affected her development. She will not be entirely human. Elena looked up at him, and he expected to see fear or anger or betrayal. Instead, he saw only curiosity. What will she be? I do not know exactly. Something new, something unprecedented. She will likely live longer than normal humans, heal faster, perceive things others cannot. The full extent of the changes will only become clear as she grows. Elena considered this, her gaze returning to the baby nursing at her breast. Will she need blood, like you? I do not believe so. The changes are not that complete. She is not vampire, merely touched by vampire essence, but I cannot be certain. We will learn together as she grows, together. Elena smiled, that warm expression that had somehow become essential to Matthias's existence. I like that word. It suggests a future I was not sure I would have. The psychic channels carried news of Hope's birth throughout the vampire territories within hours. Reactions ranged from curiosity to concern to outright alarm. A child touched by vampire blood, born of a mother who had survived death fever through unprecedented treatment, represented something entirely outside vampire experience. Lord Kale's contempt reached new heights. Ravencroft has created an abomination, a hybrid creature that belongs to neither world. This is what comes of interfering with mortal affairs. This is why we maintain separation. But other voices disagreed. Lord Surin spoke publicly for the first time in decades, his ancient authority lending weight to words that challenged centuries of orthodoxy. The child is not an abomination. She is an evolution. She represents what becomes possible when vampires choose to give rather than take, to heal rather than harm, to protect rather than prey. His mental voice carried across every territory, reaching lords who had never heard him speak. Ravencroft did not create a monster. He created hope. Perhaps it is time we remembered what that word means. The debate continued for weeks, factions forming around different interpretations of what hope's existence signified. But through it all, Matthias remained focused on the small life that grew stronger each day, on the mother who had become family, on the future that unfolded with each sunrise and sunset. He had broken his vow and discovered something more valuable than principle. He had faced his hunger and found strength he had not known he possessed. He had saved 2 lives, and in doing so had changed everything he believed about himself and his kind. The years that followed reshaped everything Matthias had believed about vampire existence. Hope grew from infant to child to young woman, each stage revealing new facets of what she had become. She could see in darkness as clearly as daylight, could hear heartbeats from across a room, could sense emotions in ways that sometimes frightened those around her. But she also carried her mother's warmth, her mother's compassion, her mother's fierce determination to see good in a world that often seemed determined to disappoint. Elena remained at the fortress, her presence transforming the ancient structure from a place of solitary exile into something that felt almost like home. She managed the household with practical efficiency, corresponded with mortal villagers that sought Matthias's help, and raised her daughter with a combination of love and discipline that Matthias found endlessly fascinating to observe. He had not expected to become a father, had not believed himself capable of the patience and tenderness that role required. But hope had a way of drawing things from him that he had not known existed, questions and stories and quiet moments of connection that built something between them that transcended the circumstances of her unusual birth. "Tell me again about the night you saved Mama," Hope would ask, curling beside him in the library while Elena prepared dinner in the kitchens below. "Tell me about the candles and the fever and how you were scared but did it anyway." Matthias would tell the story, each retelling slightly different, each version shaped by what Hope needed to hear at that particular moment in her growth. Sometimes she needed to hear about courage, sometimes about sacrifice, sometimes about the importance of breaking rules when rules stood between you and something that mattered. "You broke your promise," Hope observed one evening, her perception cutting through to the heart of the story as it always did. "The promise you made to yourself about never drinking human blood again. But breaking it saved us. Yes. So sometimes breaking promises is the right thing to do?" Matthias considered his answer carefully. Hope was 12 now, old enough to understand complexity, young enough to be shaped by the lessons she absorbed. Sometimes the promises we make become prisons rather than principles. We must be wise enough to know the difference. How do you know the difference? When keeping a promise would require you to let someone die who could be saved. When your principle serves only your own comfort rather than any greater good. When the person you were, when you made the promise, would be ashamed of the person who refuses to break it. Matthias looked at her with eyes that had seen 8 centuries and found wisdom in unexpected places. "Your mother taught me this. She asked me to choose her daughter over my vow, and in doing so, she helped me see that the vow had become a hiding place rather than a standard." Hope nodded slowly, processing this with the seriousness she brought to everything. "I want to help people too, like you helped us, like you help the fever victims who come to the fortress. You will. In your own way, in your own time. You carry gifts that no one else possesses. The question is not whether you will help, but how." The treatment for death fever had spread throughout the vampire territories, saving hundreds of lives in the years since Elena's recovery. Not every attempt succeeded. Some patients were too far gone. Some vampire blood too weak despite human feeding. But the success rate was high enough that hope had become reasonable where only despair had existed before. Matthias trained other lords in the process, sharing knowledge freely, refusing any payment or recognition. He had not saved Elena to become famous. He had saved her because she needed saving, and he could help. The accolades that followed were incidental, sometimes uncomfortable, always deflected back toward the simple truth that compassion was its own reward. Lord Cale Shadowmere had grown increasingly isolated as his contempt found fewer supporters. The old guard who shared his views were dying out, not through violence but through the slow erosion of relevance. Younger vampires, those turned in the decades since Hope's birth, grew up in a world where helping mortals was not shameful but admirable. They looked to Matthias as an example, sought his counsel, asked him to teach them the old ways that had become new again. "You have started a revolution," Lord Soren observed during one of their regular conversations. "I suspect you did not intend to. I intended to save one woman and her unborn child. Everything else has been consequence." The most profound revolutions are always consequences. They begin with small choices that accumulate into transformation. Saren's ancient voice carried satisfaction that Matthias had rarely heard from him. "You chose compassion when contempt would have been easier. You chose sacrifice when selfishness would have been safer. Those choices rippled outward, touching lives you will never know, changing minds you will never meet." Hope turned 16 the same year that death fever finally disappeared from the mortal lands entirely. The last case was treated by a vampire lord in the southern territories, a young immortal who had learned the process from Matthias himself. The disease that had claimed thousands of lives over generations had been defeated, not by mortal medicine, but by vampire blood freely given. Alina wept when she heard the news, tears of joy streaming down a face that had aged gracefully over the years. "You did this," she said to Matthias, gripping his hands with strength that still surprised him. "You saved me, and in saving me, you saved everyone who would have died after." "We did this," Matthias corrected gently. "You gave me the courage to try. Hope gave me the reason to continue. I simply provided the blood. Simply." Alina laughed, that warm sound that had become essential to his happiness. "You broke a 400-year vow, faced your deepest fears, transformed vampire society, and ended a plague that had killed for generations. There is nothing simple about what you did." She leaned forward and kissed his cheek, a gesture of affection that had become natural between them over the years. "Accept the credit, Matthias. You have earned it." Part 10. Hope came to him on the evening of her 21st birthday, her expression carrying the weight of a decision long contemplated. She had grown into a remarkable woman, possessing her mother's beauty and warmth alongside gifts that set her apart from any mortal who had ever lived. She could sense illness in others before symptoms appeared, could heal minor wounds with her touch, could perceive truths that others tried to hide. The vampire blood that had saved her life before birth had transformed her into something unprecedented, a bridge between two worlds that had always existed in opposition. "I want to become a healer," she said, settling into the chair across from his desk where so many important conversations had taken place over the years. "A real one. I want to travel to the mortal cities, learn their medicine, combine it with what I am. I want to save lives the way you saved mine and Mama's." Matthias studied her, seeing the determination in her eyes, recognizing the same fierce will that had kept her mother walking through a blizzard with death fever burning through her body. "This will be dangerous. Not everyone will accept what you are. Some will fear you. Some will try to destroy what they cannot understand. I know. Mama has told me the stories of how mortals treated vampires before you changed things, how they still treat them in territories where the old ways persist." Hope leaned forward, her unusual eyes catching the candlelight. "But I cannot hide in this fortress forever. I cannot waste what I am because the world might be cruel. You taught me that. You taught me that some things are worth the risk." She was right, and he knew it. He had spent 4 centuries hiding from his own nature, and that hiding had helped no one. Hope had the potential to help thousands, perhaps millions, if she was willing to face the dangers that came with being different. "Your mother will worry," Matthias said quietly. "Mama will understand. She worried about dying in a blizzard, and instead she found you. She worried about losing me to the fever, and instead we both survived. Worry is not a reason to stop living." Matthias smiled despite himself. "You sound like her. I learned from both of you, from her courage and your sacrifice, from watching you face your fears and choose compassion anyway." Hope reached across the desk and took his hand, her touch warm in ways that still surprised him after all these years. "You are not my father by blood, but you are my father in every way that matters. You saved my life before I was born. You raised me, taught me, showed me what it means to be strong and kind at the same time." The word struck something deep in his ancient heart, something he had not known was waiting to be touched. He had never thought of himself as Hope's father, had never presumed to claim that title. But she was offering it to him now, freely and fully, and the gift was more precious than any he had received in 8 centuries of existence. "I am proud of you," Matthias said, his voice rough with emotion he rarely allowed himself to express. "Whatever you choose to do, wherever you choose to go, know that I am proud of the woman you have become." Hope smiled. That same warm expression her mother wore, the expression that had somehow become the center of his world. "Then give me your blessing. Let me go and become what I was born to be. You have it. All have always had it." Alina joined them as the sun set, her presence completing the small family that had formed through circumstances no one could have predicted. She had aged as mortals age, her hair now streaked with silver, her face lined with years of laughter and worry and love. But her eyes remained the same, still carrying the fierce determination that had driven her through a blizzard, still burning with the will to live that had inspired Matthias to break every vow he had made. "She told you," Alina said, settling beside Hope with the easy grace of a mother who had learned to let go in stages. "She did." And Matthias looked at the 2 women who had transformed his existence, who had taken a lonely vampire hiding in a fortress and turned him into something he had never imagined he could become. A healer, a teacher, a father, and I gave her my blessing, as I suspect you already gave yours. Alina smiled, reaching across to take his hand while her other arm wrapped around Hope. We are a strange family, the three of us. A vampire who feeds on weak blood, a mortal who survived impossible odds, and a daughter who belongs to both worlds and neither. Strange, Matthias agreed. But good, strange and good. Hope departed a week later, carrying letters of introduction to healers and scholars across the mortal lands. Carrying knowledge that no one else possessed. Carrying the legacy of a night when a vampire lord chose compassion over principle and changed everything that came after. Matthias watched her go from the fortress walls, Alina beside him, their hands intertwined as they had been so many times over the years. The hunger still prowled at the edges of his awareness, still demanded satisfaction that preserved blood could only partially provide. But he had learned to live with it, to accept it as the price of the choice he had made, to understand that some costs were worth paying forever. "Do you regret it?" Alina asked quietly, her eyes still fixed on the distant road where Hope's carriage was slowly disappearing. "Breaking your vow? Everything that came after?" Matthias considered the question, turning it over in his mind as he had so many times before. He thought about the hunger, the struggle, the constant effort required to maintain control. He thought about the mockery of lords who still believed compassion was weakness, the isolation that came from choosing a different path. Then he thought about Hope's smile, Elena's warmth, the lives saved by a treatment everyone had called impossible. He thought about the family he had found in the most unlikely circumstances, the purpose he had discovered in the most unexpected place. "No," he said finally, pulling Alina close as the last light faded from the sky. "I regret nothing. I regret nothing at all." And somewhere on a road leading toward a future full of possibility, a young woman with vampire blood in her veins and her mother's courage in her heart rode toward a world that needed exactly what she had to offer. That was enough. That was more than enough. Asterisk. Asterisk. If you enjoyed this story, click the video on your screen now to watch another unforgettable tale. Asterisk. Asterisk.